I'm Sarah Swans. There was a fabulous group of people called the Book Giveaway Committee who went out to reach out to vendors and get us some cool free things, and I'm your Oprah for today. So thanks for coming back from lunch early. You must be present in the room to win, so that's why you guys are all here, I know that. So let's find a winner. So we've got a bunch of gifts, and then we also have some license codes to hand out. So if your name, if you are William Ullman, are you in the room? Anyone know William? Yay, come on up. And you'll have your choice of two things. And Mary is kindly handling all of that while I rerun the thing. So. I don't remember anymore. You want to know what the things are? I actually don't remember anymore. I have to look at my list. Jonathan, Kirtharan, woohoo! So some of them are like coding books from Manning Publishing and who's the other publisher? Rosenfeld Media, and then some. We have 5 free Oxygen licenses. I'll do one more, and what's the other thing? A couple more, there's a couple more of the free books I don't remember the titles of, to be honest. So. How about David? Are you in the room? Come on down. Woohoo! So at a couple more of our breaks throughout the session, we're going to do this again. So we'll just stick with these 3 for now, but come back again. We're going to do this throughout the whole conference. Just hit rerun.
Thanks, Anne. Okay. Ooh. Welcome back. Sorry, I got to scroll. I hope everybody had an awesome lunch. Fantastic salad. Was delicious. And that you guys are ready for a good afternoon. So first announcement, community support volunteers for the afternoon are Jeremy Friesen and Ann Slaughter. They'll be in zebra lanyards. You should see them, hopefully. If you could raise your hands. Jeremy's over there, Ann's over there, perfect. And online community support volunteer is gonna be Bobby Fox. She's Bobby Fox with an I on Slack, and she's raising her hand in the back, but if you're online, you probably can't see her. Just as per usual, we know Code4LIb takes a lot of volunteer hours to get this going and run smoothly, so I just wanna give individual shout out to the local planning committee for all the work that they've put in. Kenneth Rose, Jason Glenn, Anne-Marie Mesko, Rashid Siddiqui, Julia Corin, Lena Spots, Shannon Reif from Carnegie Mellon University, and then from the Carnegie Museums of Pittsburgh, Dominique Luster, and from the Senator John Hines History Center, Matt Strauss. Side note, the Hines History Center has given every Code4LIb attendee free access with their badge to go check out the museum, so take advantage of that. From Chatham University, Molly Teague, I think I pronounced that last name correct, and then the University of Pittsburgh, Justina Phillips. There's a quiet room available on the 2nd floor, so we're on the 3rd floor. You'll go down 1 in the Armstrong Meeting Room. It should be on the digital sign outside the room. And if you're looking to refill your water bottles like I was this morning, there's refill stations. That one's gone, empty, so back of the room on the left. Bathrooms, all gender bathrooms on this floor, right outside, and then every other restroom, you can find more downstairs. If you're a presenter today, tomorrow, or Wednesday, make sure that, and you haven't signed the speaker consent form, make sure you get that done. Stop by registration, they'll have it, and you can either confirm or decline the streaming of your session. So if you're doing it this afternoon, I hope you guys all did your consent forms. Other than that, let's get the ball rolling. I'm going to invite Amanda Rust up to the stage to present on Design for Diversity Towards a More Inclusive Information Systems. Of course. Where did it go? I think I just closed it. What the heck? No. The touchpad's just being really finicky. Oh, it's on this screen, so I can't access it. Can we get the screen back? There we go. Why, Dre, why? No. Step back. I got this.
I'll make it go.
Uh-uh.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. All right.
Awesome, thank you. Yes, and hello, good afternoon. Hi, everyone. I am Amanda Rust. I'm the Associate Director for Services in the Digital Scholarship Group at Northeastern University Libraries. I think, yeah, that is me on Twitter if you want to get in touch later. And if I were to describe my job, it would be something like digital project / middle manager who works with a lot of special collections and archives. Sorry, my phone decided to start buzzing, so we're just gonna do that. And thank you everyone for being here, where I think among other things, you will watch me touch my face 200 or 300 times during this talk. So bear with me, you can judge me, I will be judging myself. I also really want to thank the conference organizers and the hotel staff that make this all possible. I'm sure their jobs have been particularly stressful and unpredictable this week, so thank you. The live stream and captioning is also great, so thanks to folks for that too. So I'm here to talk about Design for Diversity, which is an initiative in my group. Large portions of this work were funded by a generous IMLS Forums grant. So let's start with our core motivations. Design for Diversity is an initiative that, as you can read, focuses on the ways in which information systems embody and reinforce cultural norms, and asks how we might design inclusive information systems that account for diverse cultural materials and ways of knowing. So these statements betray two of our major assumptions right away. So first, that technology is not neutral. Even if it claims to be neutral, it's embodying the values of the status quo, and when that status quo oppresses people, your technology will further that oppression. Our keynote this morning did a really great job of exploring this. And second is that systems are designed by people, and people can make change, right? The system is not inevitable. It's the result of a bunch of decisions and actions taken by people. I also want to note that our group felt some additional urgency around these issues because it was becoming clear, and this is for more context about Northeastern, that both through our own research interests, plus the kind of work that our campus archives and faculty partners were doing, our group is really starting to have a focus on reparative archives. So thinking of how to define that, basically how collections involving the history of underrepresented and marginalized groups can be used to address inequity today. And so I think of this in some ways as our partners are going out and forming these fantastic relationships, how do the folks on the systems side not drop the ball, right? How do you not screw that up? But how do you kind of carry the torch into the system? So hence this project, I was the co-PI with our digital scholarship group director, Julia Flanders, and our main thrust, I think most simply, is what do we need to make more inclusive information systems? This is actually not a new topic of discussion. We can think of discussions about Library of Congress subject headings as having a 50-year history, maybe, at this point in time. So our question wasn't so much, should change happen, but why hasn't it? So we focused on 2 points of impact. One, the education of new practitioners in perhaps LIS or museum programs. And second, opportunities for change in the workplace. We did things like a scan of the field. We surveyed course listings for LIS programs, academic literature, formed a few kinds of working groups, hosted 2 large public events, and decided that our main method, or one of our main methods of communication, would be a prototype toolkit providing resources for people that want to do more in this area. So I'm here to talk about today. Before I share the toolkit, I'm going to subject you to some of my reflections, but hopefully it will show how we got to the toolkit format. So first, the study of how technology reflects bias has a long history in a lot of different fields, but that history doesn't seem to be always taught in what we might call practical technical courses. For example, computer science students told us there's no focus on ethics and society in their curriculum. Keeping in mind this is 2015, this is 5 years ago, maybe it's different now. Or if there is a mention of ethics and society, it's in one class. It's in the ethics and society class. And then you take that class and you're done, you're ethical. Go forth and be ethical, right? We saw something really similar in the LIS programs that we surveyed in 2015. Where diversity and inclusion was mentioned, it was in a separate course, not a core part of the curriculum. There were certainly exceptions, right? I'm thinking of the Knowledge River program at the University of Arizona, or Nicole Cook's work at the iSchool at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, but largely one course, separate. And it's also worth noting that in 2015-2016, where we saw LIS courses on diversity and inclusion, it was always within public services. Reference and outreach, not the archives processing class, not the digital libraries class, not the metadata class. So you get a real sense of, oh, diversity and inclusion, that's for the forward-facing folks in the educational field. The next thing that really came to the forefront was no one reads the literature of other disciplines. As we were doing this environmental scan, we found that the archivists were citing other archivists. The computer science folks were citing other computer science folks. The cataloging folks were citing other cataloging folks, right? You get the idea. And related to this idea of wanting to be grounded in the literature, where there is this beautiful long history of talking about inclusive information systems, is determining how to effectively communicate across our, what I'm going to call, technical practical fields. So speaking for myself, I am a busy practitioner. Sometimes I want to read a book, sometimes I do not. Particularly if I am under deadline pressure on a specific project. I want something informed by that beautifully researched academic monograph, but something that is short and impactful and full of practical working examples that I can implement. So theory, moving it into practice. This is another area where my feelings about the toolkit really changed over time. The overwhelming percentage of cultural heritage materials in the US, if we think broadly, right, historical societies, house museums, are in vendor systems, and those organizations have no internal development staff. Probably most of us here at Code4LIb are unusual in either being technical development staff or having access to that kind of staff. So I think the question really, for me, became how do those of us in resource-rich or resource-richer organizations organize with and empower practitioners at smaller institutions to together put pressure on vendors. I'm not saying anything super new right here, but it definitely comes up. And over time, it became really apparent to me that at least 50% of the time, the problem is not your system, the problem is your workflow. So it's like good news, bad news. It's often our workflows that encode our values as an organization, sometimes more than the actual systems that we use. So the bright side of this is we can change our workflows, right? The frustrating side of this sometimes is why haven't we? Which leads almost directly into my next point, which is that often when people choose a particular design or workflow, they do so in terms of what is optimal or most efficient, right? These are super loaded terms. Real talk, they often mean what is optimal and most efficient for the system, or optimal and most efficient for the developers and technical support staff, or optimal and most efficient for local IT. Or they mean what gets processed the most in the least amount of time. What gets the most processed in the least amount of time. You get it. So optimal and efficient for numbers and speeds, processes, right? So what if we decide instead that the optimal system is the one that leaves us with the best relationship with our partners, right? This system might have some redundancy, which makes you twitch. The workflow might be distributed and a little bit slower, a little bit more people mediated. You might have to, and I know this can be upsetting, I was trained the same way, you might have to touch the same record twice, right? I get it. My training was the optimal system is standardized and centralized. You only make decisions once, and revisiting a decision means that you failed. Proper project development happens in an orderly march into the glorious sunrise of a new day. So I think these are terms we can question, right? If it's optimal, if it's efficient, for who, for what? So the toolkit, hopefully you will see how some of this follows. First, we selected what we thought were some of the most impactful publications, categorized those into major topics. This was an attempt to start to bring together things across disciplines. And then we commissioned 3 forms of writing for the toolkit itself. The URL should be on the lower left. It is on the, wait, your lower left. Case studies is the first sort of genre of writing that we commissioned, and they are specific analyses of information and computer systems using inclusivity as a frame. Study paths combine those case studies with readings and a learning activity. So this is to animate the toolkit. And the how-to guides, there are 2, basically help you think about how to use this for teaching and then for change within your workplace. So our goal was to design something with relatively brief but impactful readings and activities that a busy instructor or practitioner could use in short bursts, say in the classroom, professional development workshops, workplace study groups, et cetera, et cetera. So we created this digital library. We also developed a set of genres and categories based on our scan of the field, conversations with folks, looking for formats and topics that seemed the most punchy. So we started originally saying, oh, we're gonna follow like the tech stack and we're gonna go from operating system all the way up through the network, all the way up. And we really found that a lot of these topics sort of stretch across that very narrow, like what is the tech stack view. So this is what we came up with, happy to have criticism. But basically topics like algorithmic bias, collecting materials, metadata and nomenclature, intellectual property, et cetera. So everything's kind of organized by that. So this is an example case study, one that I think is not only particularly relevant to Code4LIb attendees, but that also represents the way that case studies can surface detailed process information that isn't usually included in other publication formats. So this is written by Kim Kristen, who directs the Mukutu CMS project, among many others. She's amazing, just follow everything that she does. And she came to speak at one of our design meetings and described the Mukutu development process as community software development, was the phrase she used. And I was instantly like, tell me more, this sounds fantastic. So she wrote a case study of how this system was developed, and she described how some of the design processes that they've used over its long history. So Mukutu actually had its origins in a 2001-2002 collaboration that she had with others and with the Warramungu Aboriginal community in Tennant Creek in Australia. And they were looking to move some of their collections online and finding that CMSs available at the time were not serving their needs. So throughout this case study, Kim not only gives a strong sense of the philosophical and theoretical approaches most important to the Mukutu team, but she also describes some of the specific mechanisms that support their intensely collaborative process. So this first surfaces the great deal of time and connection that this type of development takes, right? But by having it in a case study, it's something that you could take to a campus administrator and say, do you want something this awesome? Then you need to give it this much time, right? Kind of like we're all providing cover for each other in a way, or amplifying our voices. And second, this case study gives a lot of practical ideas on how you actually create robust partnerships, right? So Kim talks about how they facilitate annual meetings with their users, how they create regional development partners, and how they focus their assessment on relationships rather than numbers. So there's a lot of other wonderful case studies. I wish I had time to tell you about them all, but please go check them out. So next I want to just highlight an example study path to give you a sense of how these all come together. This one was developed by Sonoe Nakasone. And she first asks people to read that case study on Muka2. And then she has folks sort of look at some example websites and compare how different online descriptions affect our understanding of an item. She asks learners to look through a few different websites and gather a collection of 8 to 10 items they would use in an exhibit. She then prompts learners to compare how the metadata styles on each website, some using Muka2, some not, would affect your curatorial decisions. This is brilliant, right, I think. It takes this very theoretical idea and makes it very concrete and personal and active. So what I want to end with are resources that I don't think actually exist yet, but as we were doing this project, I kept wanting to see. We didn't have time to do it. Again, though, thank you to the IMLS for supporting what we could do. So the first is maybe a sort of series of recurring support for institutional self-study, right? We have the Our Library and Student Privacy Self-Study 2022. And here I was really inspired by the Virginia Commonwealth Gender Inclusive Library Work Group report. I think that was headed up by Erin White. Other people, if you haven't seen that, definitely take a look. But in terms of thinking about how to prompt workplace change, self-study is a big place to start. So how do you get money and time to do that? Second is the Journal of Really Short Workflows and Case Studies, volume number 3. So I would love to see an ongoing publication venue for short studies and workflows. Sorry, for short case studies and workflows. For our toolkit, we commit to keeping it available, making it an ongoing publication, but there's nothing like the labor of a full editorial board to kind of keep something going year in, year out, year in, year out. I'd also love to see auditing and checklist tools to help practitioners evaluate vendor systems and exert pressure on the library vendor market. Library consortia in particular might be really powerful here. And I think Matthew Reedsma's recent book, which I have to admit I haven't read yet, I apologize, but focuses on bias in discovery systems, and I believe has some ideas around auditing and checklists. So I could see developing auditing tools that maybe create some sort of seal of approval that library vendors fight to get. And finally, what I really, really, really want to see is the Handbook of Community Software Development. Or if it exists, please tell me, because this is kind of what my shop is doing, and I would love to know more about how to do this. This is really, again, inspired by Muka2, but I would love to see something that combines the best participatory design practices along with facilitation and consensus practices coming from activists and community organizers. Adrienne Marie Brown's book, Emergent Strategies, is brilliant here, right? So how do we sort of develop around consensus and facilitation? And I'd love to see our field decide that cultural heritage systems development is a place to create a new paradigm. I'm not asking for too much, right? But that we are not looking to Silicon Valley, for-profit, short-term, business-oriented software paradigms as our key model. There may be elements there that we want to use, but it's not our key model. But instead that we are developing our own models rooted in deep community partnerships. They might be slower, they might be messier, right? But long-term, more sustainable, better. As our keynote speaker asked us this morning, right? I would love to see a place where we define for ourselves values-driven programming and values-driven technology. Thank you again for taking the time to listen. Come see me if you have questions. I don't think we have a lot of time for questions right now. All right, we have 2 minutes, but find me on Twitter, find me later. I'd love to talk more about this. Probably good. Yeah, I'll just say, oh, there's one.
Can you hear me? Yes, there we go. What was I going to ask you? So this is really amazing to see, personally. Love this. What has the feedback been, and like what kind of use have you actually seen out of this as you've kind of put the final touches on it or put it more into the public space of observation and kind of making people aware of it? Just like what has the reaction been, I guess, is what I'm asking about.
Yes, thank you. So one thing that I saw, which was super exciting, 2 of our case studies, I think the ones by Dorothy Berry and Emily Drabinski, have been cited in academic literature, which is awesome. I was like, huh. I should have those sites ready to go at any point in time. And I think one of the other interesting pieces of feedback we got was we originally really thought a lot about the LIS classroom, the archives classroom, the museums classroom, but a lot more people said, I want to make change in my workplace, but I don't know how. And I don't know how might mean I need practical ideas, so hopefully case studies do that, but it also might mean I don't know how to make it important and get the resources to it. So I feel like more than I expected, the feedback is, I want to use this to convince other people at my organization that we can do this. And that was kind of a surprise. We did also get, we had lots of feedback like, simplify the website, or it has too much text, you need more visuals and videos. This is very true, right? So we got a lot of great design feedback on that in terms of thinking about how to make it more multimodal. Yeah. And in the interest of time, definitely I'll get out of here. Thanks.
Thank you, Amanda. Ken Rose, I don't know where you're at, but you are mic minder for this afternoon. Thank you, Mary, for doing the running. Next, we have remote Kate. Whew, I can speak, I promise. Kate Dybel, she is doing, oh gosh. Gracious. Plaintext, HTML, PDF, and EPUB 3. Who wins the accessibility games? Peter, are we? Perfect.
So I'm going to assume that I'm on because I realized I did not set myself up to be able to tell that. So, yep. So hello, everyone from the wonders of Syracuse. I do want to thank the conference organizers for allowing remote presentations. And from an accessibility perspective, it's a good thing to have. We might want to consider offering this more in the future. So yes, of course, I'm here at Code4LIb talking about accessibility. And this particular talk is going to be about file formats. But I first want to recognize where this talk originated from. There we go. It's actually inspired by a talk given by John Fink at ADR on Twitter, who had an interesting talk called Stop Using Proprietary Document Formats, a lightning talk where I will yell at you. So nice little fun talk there and everything. And I just want to tell you, I'm not going to yell at you today, but I do need to take a moment and yell at John. John, your advice was absolutely horrible for accessibility. Totally unrelated. You gave poor advice and you're making my job harder. But honestly, you weren't talking about accessibility, so have a good day? I don't know. But John's talk actually did inspire me to talk about, like, well, we always have these talks about what is a better file format. So let's get into the into the details about accessibility. So we're talking about document formats. I'm taking the same inspiration from John, formats that enable us to really look at text, articles, essays, something like that. And some of the most common ones in use are HTML, plaintext, EPUB3, PDF, and Word documents. Of course, though, if John was here, he'd probably say, hey, let's only look at non-proprietary document formats, and I'm fine with that. Word documents, we can skip that. Although I just want to say a quick word about Word. Microsoft, from an accessibility perspective, you can have your other opinions of the company. They've been doing a lot of amazing work in accessibility. Between the built-in accessibility checkers in Office, they have this great disability answer desk that even has ASL video chat if you need it. And they're doing some pretty cool stuff with AI for accessibility grants. Yes, I know I came from Seattle. I'm not just saying this because I'm from there. They are doing some great work, and I like to celebrate great accessibility work. So I get these questions a lot in my job. Is X an accessible format? Which one is the most accessible? And honestly, these questions, they're actually really horrible questions. The problem is that they focus too much on just the technology. When you consider accessibility, we need to think of it as really an intersection of several things. The first thing is there's an individual involved. You don't want to forget the person. But then you need to think about what are their abilities and disabilities? What are their strengths? What are the difficulties they experience? What is the tasks that they want to do? And then what is the technology or accommodations can go in there? The whole issue of accessibility is a combination of these, so you shouldn't just focus on one aspect. Now, of course, we can't just be overly general with these four things, so we have to, narrow them a little bit. So today we'll focus on reading a document. And this is very different than creating or editing a document. This is just the act of reading. Creating and editing is a totally separate task and something that involves actually more steps to really look at for accessibility. But let's think about this. When you think about reading a document, an article, a novel, just an FAQ or README file, there's a lot going in there. And often if we talk about accessibility, I'm guilty of this, I'll focus on, well, reading a document is a barrier for people who are blind because of XYZ, for people with dyslexia because of ABC, and that's too much of a disability focus. Let's focus more on this idea of flipping it. And let's just go, wait a minute, what are the things that we want to make sure everyone can access? So I want you to just think a moment about printed text. The printed page is something we've had for centuries now, and it's been co-evolving with the way we actually read over the centuries. So as typesetting improved, we read more. As we read more, we started favoring certain features over others. The idea of putting spaces between words was an amazing thing that a lot of people really, really enjoyed. And then typesetters started implementing more of those. So it was a constant evolution. And there are actually studies that say, yeah, we've kind of, just for weird aspects of physical biology, about 72 characters per line is about optimal for the way our heads and eyes are shaped. All of these things are affordances that appear on the printed page. And those are things that we want to make sure that we're carrying over when we make electronic text. And so there are a lot of affordances. You can think about headings is a big one. Footnotes, references, that's nailed to have an aside conversation. Images, tables, figures, pagination and line breaking. Captions, you want a figure caption to be somewhere near to it. Table, row, and column headers, all sorts of things. And so pretty much if you want to make an electronic text accessible, you want to implement those affordances. So really, that the question is well, that's all we have to do, right? Well, we're not quite there yet to answer the question of which file format is more accessible. Because really, do you read your electronic text in the raw cloud of quantum states? You just look at your USB drive and read your document like that? If you do, you're amazing. I want to meet you, and can I hire you to help me take over the world? Because you're pretty cool. But the reality is we read our text through appropriate file viewers of some type. So, we don't just look at the electrons. We're looking at it through a text editor, a browser, an ebook reader or something. And it's important to recognize we don't read the raw format either. technically, HTML is plain text. You can read a web page if you want, just in the raw HTML. And I highly recommend you just look at the plain source of, say, Amazon.com sometime, and just see on how enjoyable that is. I mean, if you can just get through the header content, I'll be impressed. It's actually probably less readable than Finnegan's Wake. So, I mean, really, when you talk about a file format's accessibility, we also have to consider that the appropriate viewing software is in use. And we have to hope, too, that viewing software is accessible. I have yet to come across an inaccessible text editor or text viewer, but I suspect that there are probably plenty of them out there. So who will win the accessibility games? So what's the accessibility of plain text in a text viewer? Well, really it comes down to it. Plain text is just plain text. It's completely customizable typesetting. You can have it appear in Comic Sans in 15-point font. You can make it all italic if you wanted. But, you know, and that's for the whole document. So all that text will be readily available to pretty much every assistive technology, including screen readers. And there's no table or image support, so you don't have to worry about them. But if you try to insert a table or an image through ASCII, that doesn't work too well. ASCII art, when it's like read on Twitter by a screen reader, it says the name of every punctuation mark. So not too pleasing or anything. I will admit, I'm old school. I still like my emoticons, so I'll do colon, right parenthesis. And, you know, I'm happy, but really, actually, you can argue emojis are a little more accessible than emoticons. It's a weird, strange new world. But then, too, plain text doesn't have any support for headings or content structure. So any of you who ever read a Gutenberg, free book that was in the plain text version, that was kind of a pain if you wanted to skip ahead at any point. So the summary is that plain text should be considered accessible for most uses, but only really for shorter documents where you don't need a lot of features. Now, whenever I say this, people then ask me, well, what about Markdown? Markdown's accessible, right? Well, Markdown is an accessible markup language, for those who don't know, used to generate HTML for things like README files. It's used in GitHub and Bitbucket and all that. And what it is it's basically plain text with some extra characters. So it's definitely easier to read than raw, formatted HTML. I mean, headings begin with, a first level heading begins with a hash mark at the start of a line. A second level is 2 hash marks. There's other ways of doing markup. Images are linked to. You can add alt text if you want. Tables are ASCII formatted. So you're probably getting the idea here. Like, you'd have to know a lot of these weird ASCII rules to use it with a screen reader. So markup is really not usable in a raw format. Well, what about rendered Markdown, HTML output? That gets into HTML. So let's ask about that. What's the accessibility of HTML in a browser? I recommend Firefox. It tends to be the most to spec. Yeah. Go Mozilla. HTML markup can actually indicate so many important text features. The typography, the semantic HTML can indicate sections, asides, tables, images, that's all in there. But all of that depends on proper use of that semantic HTML. Don't use a table to embed an image in the background CSS. That is so bad in so many ways. And you have to abide by the WCAG guidelines to really make sure things are accessible. That's the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. Typography can still be customized on the user end. You can set a default base font size. You can override any fonts you want. You can even recolor a page. And documents naturally reflow to any viewer size, which is actually a cool little affordance that electronic text gives. A paperback will not change how the text flows no matter what I do to it. But that can also cause headaches if you're reading something long and you switch from, say, your desktop to a laptop or your smartphone. It might be hard for you to figure out where your reading place was, where you left off. So HTML can be very accessible if standards are followed. And it generally, the markup language allows for copying almost all the affordances in text. There are some limits to it. Honestly, Tim Berners-Lee made an annoying mistake when he started with the headings by making the H1 heading effectively be the title of the page, the visible title. Yes, I know there's a title markup, but you don't ever actually see it. And so, like, if you want to, take a print document into HTML, first level headings in the print document become H2, second levels become H3s. Some typesetting techniques are really limited in it, line breaking in particular, robust table layouts, all that, and reflow can mess with your reading. So now that kind of gets into some interesting things, though. It's like going, yeah, there's some disconnect between printed text and electronic text. This matters. So a lot of accessibility work with documents has been focusing on making textbooks accessible. So all about the access to school. And really the tricky part is, though, that when there have been more and more electronic versions of textbooks, you're starting to have classes where some students are using printed books and some are using digital books. How do you give directions oriented around pages? Read page 32 through 57 for tomorrow. Well, I have a free-flowing web browser version. I have no idea where page 32 is. Or I'm on an ebook on an iPad versus my smartphone versus my laptop. That all gets confusing. That's where EPUB 3 started working. So if you don't know about EPUB 3, it is the dominant open ebook standard, pretty much used by everyone except for Amazon for their Kindles. And the EPUB 3 file is basically a zip file. You can unzip it and look at it. It consists of individual HTML files, usually one file per chapter, some CSS, some images if there are images, and then several manifest files. It's a lot like, a Java, what were those called, jar files, things like that. So, and EPUB 3 actually has its own set of accessibility standards that are pretty new, but they've been in work for years. And so, because it's HTML, EPUB 3 is just as accessible as the underlying aspects of it. But it's also, you get the same limitations with HTML. But what's really cool is they've started recognizing what are some of the challenges in collaborating around both print and electronic. So there's actually markup in EPUB that enables you to indicate where a page break would occur in an actual physical copy of the book. That way then, if you need to go to, say, page 15, this little ID thing here, the ebook reader will actually be able to say, hey, you can say, take me to page 15, and it'll go there. It might not look like page 15 to you, but you'll know where that began. So EPUB 3 is a very versatile format, and it's pretty much in ongoing development for more and more reading affordances. But why isn't EPUB 3 used more? And the problem is basically ubiquity. PDFs have been around for decades now. The software support for PDFs is so easy now. How often do you actually install a PDF reader? So the big question is, it's like, well, are PDFs accessible? And, well, I'm going to be honest here, I'm not a PDF fan. I'm trying not to be too mean to for the setup for the next speaker. The PDF, but I want you to understand some history. PDFs have been around since 1993, where a lot of it was to support document sharing. The accessibility version of it, the PDF/UA standard, did not become official until 2012. They started working on it in 2004. Aspects of it started becoming available, a few years afterward, but it was not standardized for content creators until 2012. And how it works is it's basically kind of like HTML. It adds another layer to a PDF with semantic tagging, alt text, reading order. It does a lot of that, but you have to recognize it was kind of shoehorned in on a legacy format. And so you can create a PDF/UA compliant file that is accessible to most accessible technologies, especially screen readers. So you can do that. So PDFs are pretty accessible. But you have to have some realities of this. One, the vast majority of PDFs are not accessible. A lot of them were created prior to it. Going back and remediating takes there. The export functions of exporting to PDF, a lot of them don't do PDF/UA by default. They're incomplete or they don't exist. This is a big issue in the STEM field because the LaTeX typesetting software that's used for lots of science articles does not produce any accessible output. And then remediating can be really tricky. It's easier to often fix things in the original format. OCR can be error-prone. Remediation tools are expensively licensed, and all sorts of reasons here. And there's actually some annoying incompleteness. I like just mentioning that there's actually no built-in support in the PDF/UA standard for footnotes. So when remediating, you have two options. Option one is to embed a link and also embed another backlink. That works, but it's actually pretty time-consuming to do. The actual best practice that is usually taught in PDF remediation classes when this comes up is this little complicated thing where you've basically forced screen reader users to have to listen to every footnote text without really an option. Yeah, it's complicated. I don't have time to get into it. So the question is, which of these document formats is the most accessible? Which one wins? I'm going to tell you, they all do. They all have their accessibility strengths and weaknesses. It depends on the context. Plain text is fine for short documents. In fact, it's probably better. If there was not a branding decision from my university, I'd be using plain text emails all the time because my emails tend to be short. I don't need fancy markup there. But for a scientific article, PDF. If I want to do a book, I'd actually be pushing for accessible EPUB 3. And that's the current reality of things, when it comes to accessibility formats. But I just want to take these last little bit, I'm going to run out of time for questions, sadly, to think about the future. Really, if we think about accessible documents, PDFs are going to have to stay around. They have a purpose and value in archival work, mainly in that they capture how things look. But their accessibility is complex and painful in many ways. Other formats like HTML and EPUB 3 are far more accessible, and they include a lot more markup that's more expressive and being more readily expanded. There have been no updates to the PDF/UA standard since 2012. And really, it's one of those, the recommendation for repositories right now is to keep not only a PDF around, but also the sourced files. So if you have the original Word document, if you have the source LaTeX files, keep those around in case you ever need to regenerate that, or if you need to fix it for accessibility. So a rough idea, maybe we need to just start thinking about, an ecosystem of accessible documents. Make HTML EPUB 3 sort of like the base language because they're so expressive, while PDFs are capturing the output, and then focus on exporting ideas and tools to convert. It's a rough idea, really simple. I knew I wouldn't have time to get into it. But really, kind of just wrap this all up. Current file format options aren't perfect yet for accessibility. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't do what you can. I cringe every time I have to remediate a PDF, but accessibility matters. And that's the fact. It's good work that benefits people. Accessibility is the responsibility of everyone, but you don't have to fix everything in the world right away. Don't worry about that. The main thing is to just start with something. So if you learn how to make, your PowerPoints more accessible, if you learn from the next talk on some basic PDF remediation, do it. It matters a lot. So thank you. I'm pretty much out of time. Ask me questions. I'll be on Twitter. Slides will be up in the repository shortly.
Thank you, Kate. Next up, we've got Michaela Blackham, Evaluating, Repairing, and Enhancing Accessible PDFs. I think this is a remote presentation, but the announcement keeps changing. So, yes? Are we good? Okay, let's go.
We good? Good to go?
Awesome. Hi, everyone. That's a fun transition from the last presentation to this one, I'm sure. My name is Michaela Blackham, and I'm a front-end developer as well as the resident accessibility expert at Atten Design Group. Atten is a digital strategy, design, and development agency based out of Denver, Colorado. We use Drupal and other open source technologies, user-centered design, agile development methodologies, as well as a collaborative approach with our clients. We work with cause-driven organizations who are held back by ineffective technology and design. We help them get that right so that they can focus on their mission. Today, we will be going a little bit more in depth about accessibility in PDFs, as well as how to evaluate and enhance these PDFs using Adobe Acrobat Pro. But before we begin, I just want to talk a little bit about myself. I started my career in the web industry originally as an interactive designer before moving into the development world full-time a few years ago. Ever since I can remember, interaction, ease of use, great organization, and accessibility have always been something that was pretty important to me. I grew up with a cousin my age with Duchenne muscular dystrophy and watched how she was able to do her homework, navigate the internet, or even just listen to music on her iPod, all with little to no mobility and difficulty speaking loud enough for talk-to-type programs like Dragon or Siri. Sometimes she had to get very creative, but most of the time she had to ask for help, which I know frustrated her immensely. And I always wanted to relieve her of that stress. So I slowly got involved with accessibility. And well, that's why we're here today. Because for over a decade, PDF files have been a convenient way to deliver print documents online, but they still remain a bit of a challenge to make accessible. So let's talk a little bit about PDFs and accessibility. There are a number of reasons why a PDF might not be the best fit for your content, and we have heard some of those reasons today. I am not saying everyone should be using a PDF, but I want to focus on what we need to do when we have to use PDFs. Because, well, PDFs aren't going away anytime soon. There are a number of alternatives to PDFs, but I know that your organization may not have the time, resources, or knowledge to move forward with creating various forms of content for your site. So our goal today isn't necessarily to fix PDFs completely, but to make sure you're more aware of the files you're putting on your site and how to enhance the usability and experience of those files for all users. So let's talk about some of the ways to accomplish this. If your format doesn't need to be a PDF, don't force it to be. Creating maybe a basic HTML page or EPUBs or anything of that sort is a much better use of time and resources. If you must link to a PDF, at least let the user know the link is going to an external resource. This is as easy as just adding PDF to the end of your link. For instance, maybe this is a link for the Code4LIb session schedule. Ideally, we would think that this is going to a HTML page, but if it's going to a PDF, we're going to get a little confused. So just by adding PDF to the end of your link title will be very helpful just to let the users know what's going on. Overall, the community recommends avoiding or minimizing the use of PDF files as the sole source of online information. If you can, include alternative sources along with the PDF that may be a bit easier to digest, like an HTML page that portrays the same kind of information. And finally, use programs like Adobe Acrobat Pro to enhance your PDF through tagging, reading order, alternative text, and so on. When creating accessible PDFs, just like websites, it's always best to start from the very beginning with a source file. A great place to start building a PDF is within Microsoft Word. It's one of the most popular tools out there for creating PDFs. It has wonderful overall accessibility that continues to improve with each new version. There are other programs out there, but because this is the most popular, this is one we're focusing on today. A few great reasons why Word is a great place to start is because it includes all the information necessary for accessible PDFs, such as headings, alternative text, contrast, table structure, and so on. It also includes the option to automatically create alternative text for images, and surprisingly, does a pretty good job. You'll have to go in and maybe tweak the wording or mark as decorative, but it definitely gives you a great start. It also includes an accessibility checker within the software to help you repair issues as you are creating the document. But because one of the ways to resolve the accessible PDF issue is to actually just use alternative file formats, I feel the best use of time today would be to focus on repairing current PDFs using Acrobat. And because of that, I have attached a detailed step-by-step screencast on accessible PDFs using Microsoft Word along with this presentation. And this can be found on the Atten website that I'll link to at the end of this. So let's talk about Acrobat. Acrobat Pro is the most commonly used program to evaluate, repair, and enhance the accessibility of existing PDF files. This is extremely useful for checking your work after it was created in a text editor, like Microsoft Word, as well as alleviating issues from previously created PDFs. So what makes a PDF accessible? Well, they basically follow the same guidelines to a point as a website. The goal is to pretty much make your PDF read like a web page. We need to make sure our content follows the basic accessibility guidelines, such as maybe strong context, using semantic structure, legible text size, or alternative text for images, and so on. This can seem kind of tough because, well, it isn't a web page and isn't built with the same structure. So we need to approach this a little different. Obviously, some of this can be accomplished by great design and common sense, but a majority of the technical improvements are accomplished through tagging and reading order. Tagging helps assign certain structural elements to content. This means making sure a heading 1 is read as a heading 1, a 2 is a 2, list as a list, form as a form, and so on. Along with tagging, we need to make sure the PDF is read in the order it was intended. Just because it looks like it will be read left to right and up and down doesn't mean that it will. Most likely, if you do not revise the reading order, the elements will be read in the order that they were originally created in your text editor. Maybe you added something on the top left after all the other content. Maybe you did your footer first and then your header. Well, then your footer would be read before your header. So we want to just make sure that this is done correctly. There's probably more we can talk about, but that captures the basics of what makes a PDF accessible. With that, now we can work on the steps to create accessible PDFs. We can accomplish this by following these steps. Setting up your workspace correctly to enhance your accessibility experience. Using the accessibility checker supplied by Acrobat. Add and update the appropriate tags on the page, and evaluate and improve the reading order. So let's talk a little bit about setting up your workspace and document. There are two main objectives to this step. We want to enable the accessibility plugin as a shortcut in your toolbar. We want to include a document title and assign a language. But before we really dive in, I want to show you a screen of what Acrobat looks like to a user. I know there's a lot of people out there who may not have used Acrobat Pro as it is a paid program. So I just want to go over a little bit of that. So on the right here, you can see a little bit of a flash going on, and this is the shortcut bar. This is where you're able to add the various tools that you're going to be using. This next area here is related to the shortcut that you're on and has the actions that you can take with that shortcut. And this on the left is just another extension going on with the shortcut that we're on. For this instance, we're on the accessibility shortcut, so you'll be seeing all of the actions that you can take there. So here's a little quick video of adding the accessibility shortcut to your bar. So you can see here, this is the toolbar over here, and we're going to go to the More Tools area. We'll click on that, and you can either search for the tool that you're looking for, or in this instance, I knew what I was looking for, so I go down here and I can add the shortcut to the toolbar. If we go back to the document and scroll down a little bit, you can now see that accessibility is in your shortcut. Next, we want to focus on the document title and language. So if we go up to File and then Properties within Acrobat Pro, you can see we have this pop up here. Under the Description tab, we want to just put the title of the document so that a screen reader kind of knows what document we're working with. And then over here in the Advanced tab, we want to choose the language that this is associated with. In this instance, it's English. You'll press OK, and now you have that set up the way that it needs to be. Just like the web, PDFs have some automated testing tools for us to use to check for accessibility. Acrobat has a great built-in tool for finding any major errors. And now that everything is set up correctly, we want to start assessing the document. We need to find out what was done incorrectly in order to fix it. So here we're going to check for accessibility issues. So you can see we go to the accessibility toolbar, and they give you a lot of options here, but we're just going to focus on the one, and we're just going to do a full check. Once you open that up, it gives you the ability to save all of the errors that you were able to get, and then you can turn on and off the different options. So if we run that, you can see over on the left-hand side, we now get all the issues that we have to work with. Reminder that this is similar to automated testing tools on websites, that this isn't 100%. And manual checks will also need to be involved, but this will get you most of the way there. Next, we want to take a look at the errors that we have on this slide. So you can see here, we can open it up. You can see what issues we've passed with, And some of these will automatically correct if we right-click and click Fix. But if we scroll down a little bit here, we can go to alternative text, for instance. If you click on the figure, it will show you which image we're working with, and then you can fix it by adding in your own alternative text or marking as decorative as needed. This is a great place to start looking at what's wrong and start alleviating some of those issues. Ideally, we would go through and find all the issues and maybe prioritize and start making a plan in repairing those issues. Next, we need to start focusing on adding and updating tags. We had this auto tag the document in this last step, and as mentioned, this is a great start. I recommend using the auto tag feature and then make necessary changes after. That way, you won't miss anything. It's better to be tagged incorrectly than not to be tagged at all. So now that the auto tag is complete, let's take a look at how we can update these tags. Over here, you can go to the left-hand toolbar and click the tag icon, and you can see just looking down there, we have the various H3, H1, we have sections, list items. We clicked on the H1 and it highlighted exactly what we're looking at. But let's say something isn't marked the way that we want it to be. So you can go over here and we can go to this list item, and maybe we want to tag this as something else. You can right click and go to the properties, and then you have the ability to change it out to whatever it actually is. Maybe it's a part of a table, maybe it's a paragraph or a heading of some sort. Now we can move on to reading order. This is important because we want to make sure the screen reader is reading the page in a logical way. So here we would go over to the reading order tab. And when we open that up, you can see that there's a bunch of numbers associated with all the elements on the page. And it's overall in the correct order in this instance, just because this is something I had already kind of started with. But let's say something isn't correct, you actually have the ability to drag and drop and change that slight reading order so that it is a little bit more correct. You also have the ability to go over to this reading order area. And let's say you're working with columns or a slightly difficult structure, you have the ability to draw a rectangle around the content and then assign it to whatever you need to, and then work on the reading order from there. And remember, the reading order tool displays the content order of the PDF, not the tag order. While the goal is to get the content and tag order to match the visual order, the tag order takes priority in accessibility repairs. But oh no, my PDF says it's all one image. Don't worry, I see this all the time. There are two things we want to do here to fix this. We want to check for the source files, and we want to enhance the scans. Before you do anything, you want to try and find the original source files for the PDF. This could be a Word doc, InDesign doc, etc. This is the best place to update your PDF from an image to text elements. This way, you can export it the way that it was meant to be exported and be read appropriately by, let's say, a screen reader. However, I know locating these source files, especially for very old documents, can be sometimes impossible. So Acrobat has an enhanced scans option, which will do its best to translate the image to the text that is visually shown. Now, it isn't 100% accurate, but can at least get you set up for success instead of having to recreate the entire document. So as you can see here, I'm clicking on this PDF and it's all one big image, which obviously isn't ideal. So we go over to the toolbar and choose Scan in OCR. It gives you some options at the top, and we want to make sure we recognize the text in this file. You have some settings you can work with, but we're just going to do some recognized text. And from here, you can now see that the text is readable, and you can click it and you can actually change along with that. From here, you just need to update any text that may not be accurate and then follow the steps from before to enhance the PDF with the accessibility checker, tagging, logical order, and so on. Using the knowledge of when it is appropriate to create and use PDFs and how to better the experience of the user, you'll be able to take your digital experience to the next level. I have a number of resources to share along with these slides and some screencasts, or if you're looking to get in contact with me, feel free to reach out. There will be links to anything you need on the URL above. And that's it.
Thank you, Michaela. Okay, next up we've got Kate Dowie, physical actual person will be here to present. She'll be presenting on The Digital is Critical, Designing Radical Library Systems. go.
Thank you, you're the best. So, yes, I am in fact corporeal today. First and foremost, I'd really like to thank the organizers of this year's Code4LIb. I've been on an LPC, and I know that this is a difficult job under even great circumstances, but that this is an unusually difficult year. Yeah. And I'm not a coder anymore, and I haven't invented anything that I can show you today. I don't have a cool software solution to a common problem, but I would say that this talk is a product of Code4LIb, drawn from my experiences at this conference and within this community. And I can think of no better place to start this conversation. And that's really what I'm offering with this presentation today, is a conversation about who we are and how we make what we do. As I considered this talk, I kept thinking about the meaning of the "for" in Code4LIb. What does it say about our relationship to libraries and cultural heritage institutions when we say we code for, if not with and in? If we code for, what values are we advancing? What cultures and what choices? My presentation is based on the underlying premise that libraries are not neutral, and that there is an extensive body of literature illustrating the very real cultural, political, racial, and economic ways that the library and its employees are inherently not neutral. If you're unfamiliar with this premise, there's a lot of very good literature on this topic, including by Nina de Jesus, Chris Borg, Emily Drabinski, and many, many other scholars in this field. The argument is rooted in the analysis of the base premise of library neutrality, which is often advanced as a fundamental value of American libraries, that the library is an apolitical extension of the marketplace of ideas. That itself, neutrality is rooted in Enlightenment and colonialist ideas regarding the moral superiority of the educated citizenry, and it's fundamentally disconnected from the practical choices about spaces, collections, and descriptions that imbue our work. This is an inherently political premise, and it gives lie to the concept of neutrality as some sort of deontological value. Public and academic libraries are themselves political institutions populated by individuals who operate within social systems that influence what we do and what we make. And consequently, the technological systems that are created, reproduced, and maintained in and for libraries are also inherently not neutral. Open source code and open digital content and metadata are inherently radical concepts. It's rooted in the idea that knowledge and applications can belong to humanity for reuse and customization by anyone without restrictions. This puts us in opposition to the commercial interests interested in exploiting our users and communities, like Amazon, like Elsevier, and is some of the most powerful work that we can undertake. And as social institutions, libraries have an obligation and an opportunity to advance both as public goods whenever possible. Furthermore, open access is an inherently radical idea. Freely accessible, transformable knowledge to anyone on this planet. The Budapest Open Access Initiative, authored nearly 20 years ago, positions open access as uniting humanity in a common intellectual conversation and a quest for knowledge. I mean, what a statement. Digital projects historically advocate for social justice goals, and projects like Documenting the Now, the International Children's Digital Library, and many of the projects that have already been presented on here today reify this with both their missions and frequently through inclusive design practices. Open source systems, particularly those that originate with libraries, stand in opposition to these neoliberal influences, and we make these projects, these repositories, these archival management systems, and these knowledge bases because we think it is important to our patrons and our mission to support open projects over closed and proprietary applications. We don't engage in patron surveillance, we don't advance the police state, and we don't sell our user data to increasingly shady operations. That's not us. But who gets to make these systems and why? What sort of libraries get to participate in the design and implementation of them? Who gets to govern? Are we making applications that fulfill that original mission? To get to this answer, we need to look at the social forces that come to bear on our own ecosystems. Intersectionality is a concept that was coined by Kimberly Williams Crenshaw, and it's been expanded upon by numerous Black feminist scholars, including Patricia Hill Collins, Audre Lorde, Bell Hooks, and many more than I can cite here. And while the concept is often misinterpreted and weaponized by people who are not debating in good faith, the fundamental premise is that systems of social oppression compound and create unique forms of discrimination experienced by individuals, and that these then play out in policy, design, and infrastructure throughout our lives. I've called out 3 examples on my slide here, but there are many more issues that come to bear on library systems, including ableism, gender identity, and orientation. These systems of oppression impact our work at both personal and organizational levels, and I am bringing them up here not to alienate or to invoke defensiveness, but so that we have a common vocabulary to build shared understanding. Within libraries, library IT is a unique subculture of libraries. It tends to be largely male, tends to be largely white, and it's frequently somewhat segregated from the feminized environment of the broader organization, sometimes very literally, and here I'd wonder if anybody else works in a downstairs sort of area, because I have for my whole career. And culturally, it has its own norms and rhythms, its own language and behavior, and those can both serve to enhance collegiality and simultaneously alienate outsiders. Organizationally, many cultural heritage institutions and universities have engaged in white supremacy and patriarchal practices in pursuit of neoliberal ends, and many still do today. A lot of us work at organizations with long and ugly legacies. They're legacies of stolen land, stolen people, stolen artifacts. They're legacies of exclusion and legacies of oppression. This inevitably means that the organizational wealth that is used to pay for the talent that undergirds our library systems is a byproduct of our own oppressive and exclusive legacies. Our profession and workforce itself struggles with pervasive whiteness, and as associations like the American Libraries Association and the Society of American Archivists grapple with elections, petitions, publications, and policies that seek to reinforce the old guard in the face of diversity and change. Structurally, our open library systems tend to have governing groups of varying structure and formality that influence and drive strategic direction. The makeup of those groups is often dictated by institutional involvement in a project. The wealth, in other words, either through direct financial contributions or labor, which is often explicitly or overwhelmingly technical labor. Even the shorthand of committer, which is used in several open source projects to identify contributors, is intrinsically linked to code versioning. Our code carries both individual and collective baggage that's caused by our own biases. And our project communities are small, so both individuals and institutions have outside influence. Some examples of that are that digital library projects are subject to a lot of economic stratification. So the design and implementation choices at the upstream and community level can privilege wealthy higher education institutions that have a fleet of developers. And consequently, that makes implementation and maintenance increasingly unattainable for large swaths of the cultural heritage and education landscape. So as these technological barriers grow higher, more collections, more projects, more users are left behind. A cottage industry of what I sometimes call digital et cetera librarianship, right? Digital projects, programs, initiatives, scholarship, et cetera, has emerged in the last decade, and I am one of them. And the librarians, who are frequently women in these positions, might manage digital content, repository deposits, content creation, user experience, technical instruction, other aspects of these library systems. Quite a lot of us can code, but use our skills to perform the emotional labor of translation, feedback collection, and user support, and complete tasks and design workflows that compensate for poor system design. Committed, but not committers. And these are cultural problems. Those are unambiguously difficult to address, but it is possible to take action for improvement. Again, our community is small, and individuals and the relationships that we build between us have outsized influence here. Conscious practices enacted by each of us at our home institutions and at our home locations have the potential to reshape our applications. And rethinking the value systems that we recreate in our communities of practice can change and expand our community for the better. There are many scholars that write about and advocate the ethics of care. which is a moral framework for understanding ethics as an interpersonal and a relational construct. The term in theory originates with Carol Gilligan and has been explored at length by scholars like Nell Noddings, Virginia Held, and Joan Tronto, whose work I'm referencing and drawing upon here. These are the tenets of care between individuals. I was reminded by a colleague recently of the lyrics to the Helping song from Free to Be You and Me, that some kinds of help is the sort of help that helping's all about, and some types of help is the type of help that we can all do without. And it occurred to me that it's actually a pretty good start for talking about care ethics. I also kind of identify as a Foucauldian jerk, and I tend to approach the ethics of care with an eye to the way that it shifts power dynamics between a giver and a receiver by decentering the needs of those with power in service of common good. Unresponsive actions of care that maintain power structures is, frankly, guess what, just paternalism. So I can speak to how I enact many of these concepts at my home institution. And that requires constant reflection on who can and can't participate in a project or a meeting. It means acknowledging my own privileges as a white technology department head at an R1 research institution and working to broaden participation in my own home. And acknowledging that that participation is also work, and in an environment where time and resources and attention are all at a premium, that I need to adjust how I approach to users and communities by not shifting the intellectual burden to them. And I don't know that I'm any good at it. I don't have a cool success story about that, but I can show up and do the work. Design justice is a concept that's really been led by the work of Sasha Costanza-Chock and expands on a lot of principles of feminist and post-colonial human-computer interaction. It first positions design as problem solving, and then it applies inclusive practices to actively resist the intersectional influences of racism, classism, structural misogyny, cisnormativity, and ableism. In contrast to design thinking, which can treat users as superficial subjects of study and empathy and is vulnerable to ignoring and stereotyping marginalized users, design justice centers equity and participatory co-creation in its process. At the sites of creation, which is code for open source projects, the product management piece, and the governance, design justice serves to locate who has power and where, and urges those creators to center marginalized users, working very directly with those users to co-create projects. A mechanism for our system communities to consider is to elevate process in addition to product, that we can valorize and pursue documentation as an inclusive practice that is used by many outside of our community to contextualize our work. We can incorporate and celebrate the contributions of local user experience analysis or even simple feedback about how easy or hard a submission form is. And we can engage proactively in accessibility monitoring and testing and reward that community work and emotional labor. Ultimately, the radical system must embrace and expand care as a criteria for justice. Care of all of our users, care of staff, care of the environment, care of its role in the continuity of human knowledge. And that can start with intentional practice between individuals today, coding not just for our libraries and users, but with them as partners. We know the way. A year and a half ago, I wrote in a very public and very personal way about the subtle yet pervasive alienation that I felt in both my predominantly male library IT departments and the feminized environment of my broader libraries. That extended to my professional communities, that I was at once too technical and specialized for general library conferences, but too soft and too lightweight for the technical conferences. I always felt alone. Code4LIb used to seem inaccessible to me. And like I could never contribute anything valuable here because I wasn't a talented coder. And yet, I have found from giving variations of this talk at local meetups and to others in this community that this is a space that I've become most comfortable in. I started thinking about radical library systems because of Code4LIb DC and the people that brought me into this community. And I hope that this presentation serves to start a conversation that calls more people to our table. So it's very small. These slides will be posted. I do often have a reading list and citations that have influenced a lot of my thinking. These will be available up in the repository shortly. Fortunately, I got the slide deck done today, so coming out ahead. That's what I have. And again, this isn't, I can't show you, anybody here, something that I've made. But I can share my experiences, and I can hope that maybe we start to have a broader conversation about our community, about our projects, about our products, and thinking about them in a different way. So we've got time for questions, I think. Yeah.
So you're going to find out in like 2 minutes, but you're getting a ton of love on Slack.
Oh.
Everybody loves you. So this is really cool to see this kind of presentation here as like a new conference comer here. Hi. I guess what I want to know, if you're open to talking about it, and this might not be good for like this kind of question, but recognizing all of that and having that personal introspection and being able to develop to the point to where you can talk about it to other people, so on and so forth, is like one big step. How do you go about enacting that, and I guess whether fostering discussion, fostering change in communities that maybe the people who have become aware of that is a vast minority, or one that is not historically open to that kind of change or that kind of just discussion and recognition? If you have had any experiences along that line, I guess.
I mean, you know, I can kind of contextualize that in terms of, so my background is most strongly in digital libraries, right? And, you know, again, like our communities are small, you know, we all know each other. And I don't know if this precisely gets at your question. But I think about this in like a couple of different ways, you know. So one is that we can try to start messaging about these issues with the people that produce code, with the people that call into the community meetings, with the people that are in governance, who are oftentimes they're people that are in technology governance positions at like some of those institutions. The other thing that I think about is, you know, honestly, maybe we ought to start thinking about new systems, right? And what the next iteration of practice needs to look like. You know, I don't, like I said, I don't know if that necessarily gets at your question, but okay, yeah, all right. That's a good one, though. I am around to answer questions like afterwards too, right? So don't feel pressured. All right. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. All right. All right, so we are on the afternoon break now. It goes from 2:45 to 3. We have breakout sessions at 3. We have one breakout session, writing homegrown digital repo apps, not Hyrix, Islandora, etc. That'll be in Butler East on the second floor. If you have a breakout session idea, there are plenty of rooms and spots to do one, so maybe organize one if you can. Breakouts will be from 3 to 3:55. We will reconvene in this room at 4 for some really important announcements, more giveaways, and lightning talks. There's still 4 spots available for lightning talks, so go sign up. The flip chart is across from the registration room, or registration table. And, oh, lightning talks, we're not going to do presenter notes, so if you're doing one, just be prepared that you will have your slides only, just due to overhead for that. But otherwise, we'll see you guys back in this room at 4. hallways, so if you are not in the room and you want to win, you need to be in this room, no hallway track. Yep.
Drum roll, drum roll, drum roll. Yeah. It's hard. You know, it's really hard to put a dongle in one-handed.
Also one's upside down.
Oh, this needs to do
Can we-
something.
Flip the screen, Amy. Thank you.
There we go. I can't find my mouse. There we go. David, sorry you don't get to win again. Okay, drum roll. Blah 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 blah. Brian Hoyle! He's actually in the hallway selling Ubiquity. Do we give it to him?
Can he be in?
Do we give it to him? I know, but I actually just saw him on walking in when I walked in the door. Like, I know he's right there.
You can say his name real loud.
Brian Hoyle, get in the room for your prize! Is that loud enough? Well, if he comes in the room in the next minute, I might give it to him. We still have 2 more to give away. I should do the Jeopardy thing, right? Eric, yay! Eric deserves a prize. He puts in a lot of work.
He's not here, though.
Oh, he's not here? Oh.
He's very much embracing nap for lib.
Ah, I would embrace nap for lib too. Henry Steele. Henry. Come on up. No? Uh-oh. How about Brian? I think we lost a few people at the breakout sessions. Peter Murray.
He's here. He's doing the live stream. He's
Oh, okay. He's working. Yay! We have a winner. For those of you too young to know, that's a fax signal. Tyler Pearson. Anyone? Come on. Dropping like flies here. Zoya. Not here. Man. You guys are disappointing me. I had such high hopes after the first round. Okay, Jonathan. Jonathan Newton. Anyone? Yes, there's someone. Okay, way to go, Jonathan. Thank you for being here. All right, we got one more chance here. Christina. No?
seen her a lot.
She's been around. Oh man, she's maybe nap for living. Genevieve. Yes? One clap for.
You're representing her.
Okay, come on down. Let's get this over with. We got conferences to conference. So, thank you, everyone. We'll have a few more of these tomorrow, so there's still more prizes to give away.
Oh, jeez. All right, just a couple of announcements. We're live streaming, obviously, this entire conference that is in this room, so please don't stream on the conference Wi-Fi because we want to make sure everything stays up and doesn't bog down. So far, I haven't heard anything. I shouldn't say that because that's usually famous last words. So, the chat on YouTube, the live chat's been turned off. So if you have an issue, just a reminder for those watching online to use Slack, the Code4LIb Slack channel, or the Twitter hashtag to report anything. If you are doing a lightning talk, please head to the stage and line up in the order in which I announced these on the left. Because you have 5 minutes, we want to use time as wisely as possible. We've got Daniel Safford doing Expectations and Conventions, a C4L elevator story. Ruth Tillman doing Wikidata and Archives. Carrie Gordon doing Islandora 8 and Isle. Kevin Kochansky, What's New Haiku. Gretchen, oh, I'm gonna say your, thank you. Gagan, thank you, sorry, too many questions. Stage left. Just Scan It All. Dre talks about a thing. Jeff Gerhard or Gerhard, I'm not sure which one. New Apple Skin, and then Eric Morgan, Distant Reader, and Emily Wall, British Book in Illustration. And we will begin. Your slides should be in order from left to right, so just the first tab. Next.
All right. Hopefully everyone can hear me now, and this is coming up. Let's click on Present. All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Daniel Sanford. I'm here to talk about expectations and conventions, a Code4LIb elevator story. A quick starting point, I want to say thank you to David Schober, I hope I got the last name right there, and the Code4LIb Slack for a lot of very useful information. This might be kind of a tricky topic to talk about for some of the streaming folks, because we're going to be talking about the elevators here in the hotel. So let's talk about Elevator Classic. We all know Elevator Classic. It has a lot of positive features. There's haptic feedback whenever you use the interaction. It has Braille, which is quite helpful for a number of people. You can modify and work on where you want to go while you're using the elevator. Wonderful feature. And it's a standard. We all love standards, right? They're interoperable, you know how to work with them, delightful things. But there's also New Elevator, or Elevator Zero. All the elevator fun, none of the calories. It has a few modifications. You can only use this elevator outside the elevator car. So once you're in, I hope you don't ever change your mind about where you want to go. There's no Braille. There's also no haptic feedback, which I feel like might be a problem for a number of people. And if you make a mistake, like I did coming down here just a few minutes ago, you can accidentally summon 3 to 5 elevators by pressing the wrong button a couple times. So I'm sorry to anyone else who was running late because of me. It's also, as I just noted, very easy to execute denial of service attacks. You can walk up and just start pressing buttons until you have elevators going to any floor you feel like. And once you're in the elevator, if you, for example, step in because you see an open elevator and you are used to, I'll step in and I'll press the button, you are now stuck going to floor 20, and I guess you don't have much of a choice on the matter. So what happens when your expectations about how to use a piece of technology are broken? You have fear. What happens if something goes wrong? And there's a quote from Word Food where you can get stuck, and then there's a panic because there are no buttons in the elevator until you realize there is at least an open door button, which does work. Some people felt uncomfortable going into the elevator because it turns out if you walk in and you don't see a single thing to do, it's very nerve-wracking. It also causes confusion. You think you know how elevators work, but it turns out you don't, not here. Elevators are something entirely different and alien to your experience. And you can't fix mistakes. You can enter an elevator and end up on the wrong floor. You can accidentally summon too many elevators and there's no way to cancel it or interact with it. There's also a number of accessibility concerns, as I noted about the Braille, but I am not an expert on the topic, so I can't dig too far deeply into it. That is not my area of expertise, and I don't want to speak for anyone else, but it causes quite a few problems. So the question becomes, why? Why are there new elevators? Is it because it's a new, fun technology that looks great? Is it because it seems more efficient in some sort of fashion, because now you can schedule the elevators as they're moving in a sort of elevator-on-demand service? I actually don't know. I wasn't able to ask anyone here. But fundamentally, it speaks a lot to the user experience of working with an elevator. It's such a basic piece of technology, but something just as simple as moving where the buttons are makes it very difficult for anyone to interact with. So this is just a quick look at how what we think we know about interacting with the system can cause a lot of problems when it's changed. The UX matters, and thinking about how users are expected to use a system matters a great deal. I'm done in advance. Thank you very much. Enjoy Code4LIb.
Sorry, press the arrow or?
All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ruth Kitchen-Tillman. I am here to talk about a Wikidata specification that a group has been working on for archives. So I'm going to structure it as sort of a who, what, why, when, where, when, how. This is an abbreviated form on the slide so that you can get to it. But, all right. So who? It's a loosely affiliated group of folks who are all interested in how archival data can be productively created and shared as linked data. What? Using major archival descriptive and content standards, so we're talking ISAD-G, DAX, for all you standards nerds out there, we are relating them to mainstream ways of doing linked data. That includes schema.org, which was a previous project, and now Wikidata. We reuse what's already there and propose new classes or properties for things when support doesn't already exist. So for example, for schema.org, members were involved in an international task force that actually proposed new schema properties and such that are in the process of being adopted. And for Wikidata, we can make proposals ourselves, but we need participation and feedback. Why? Because it's pragmatic. Many of these things already exist. We have ways that are, we can search and use them. We know that if we publish a schema, certain things will eat that. If we publish as Wikidata, we can query it in certain ways. Because if we want to participate in a world of linked data, we can't do it in silos. It's more than rearranging our data as graphs. We're not abandoning data standards. In fact, we're working specifically from content standards, but we're seeing where we can play with others. Where? We conduct the work through Zoom meetings and a Google group, and we hang out in what's known as the Archivist Working with Data Slack. When? Every other Tuesday at 2 p.m. Eastern on Zoom. Anyone who's interested can get in touch with me. That's my email, rkt6@psu, or Elizabeth Russi Roque at Emory. And how? Lots of showing up and working together. Some people do the heavy work of crosswalking, writing documentation, and then other people come in and use the time that they have to review it. People test it, they try to make records. Testing, we need your testing. So that's what I'm here to pitch. Thank you.
I'm on Google. Yeah. Oops. Oops. Okay, so I guess I should blow this up somehow. This computer looks so foreign to me. It's like, what is this thing?
It's a PC.
Present. Duh, I should have gotten that one. Anyway, I'm going to give my 5-hour presentation on Islandora 8 and ISLE in about 3 minutes. So what I'm really here to say is that Islandora 8, if you're familiar at all with Islandora, Digital Asset Management System, is a complete rewrite and a complete re-architecture to make it more usable, more scalable, faster, and does your laundry. So, you know, it's pretty much Drupal 8 website. It's built around these components. I'm not going to read this. I'll put it up. So hopefully I don't have to do that. Just going to go through this. This is what it's made out of. So almost all of these components now are separate. So when you put them together in Docker, in their own containers, you can scale any bit of it as you need. So if you're doing ingest, if you need to extract metadata, if you need to, you know, create derivatives, all of those each part of it can be scaled. And so there are two projects. There's Islandora 8, which is the basic product, and there's Islandora for Everyone, which was a project done by a separate group to Dockerize Islandora. They are gradually becoming one project. So Islandora 8 is built with Dockerization in mind and scalability in mind and the ability to put things in their appropriate containers. And pretty close down the line, this will all be done with Kubernetes to orchestrate it, so you just, makes it quite simple. There'll still be a lot of opportunity to do a whole lot of work creating one of these repositories, but it will hopefully, well, no, it will definitely eliminate a lot of the grunt work. That's it.
I sent a link.
Okay, so it should have been, what's the title?
What's new, Arcade?
Where did you send it?
Oh, in Slack.
I didn't get it.
No?
No.
Oh.
Did you send it to the wrong Whitney?
I don't think so. I can bump and go
Let's
later.
bump. Gretchen, go ahead. Did you get my slides? Yeah, I got everybody else's. Okay. Hello. Let me reopen that. Okay, so hi, I am going to talk about a project I did as a consultant involving a large-scale digitization of an archival collection. So the idea was just to scan it all, since we had the money to do that, and that's the easy part, and we'll just figure the rest out later. The alternate title to this is My Midlife Crisis in Digital Library Form, because this project really challenged about every belief I had formed over the past 15 years of my career about digital libraries. And I'd like to use you all for free therapy right now to talk about that. Also, subliminally, I'm putting pictures related to Pittsburgh on every slide because I'm from here and I want to. Okay, so how did we get to the idea that we could easily scan a whole collection and put it online? In the early days of digitization in the 90s, the Jerome Bettis era, we were experimenting with digitization itself rather than systematic ways to make content available. And this was mainly done by large, well-funded institutions. Later, in the Troy Polamalu era of the early aughts, we tried to increase the scale and we adopted risk management approaches, and we started putting more and more online, but without greatly increasing our system's abilities to handle it. Over the last 10 years, the Le'Veon Bell decade, if you will, we've seen more and more distant reading and data analysis applied, like the projects we actually heard about this morning related to analyzing letter forms and historical occupations. But this stuff often requires us to add structure where there currently isn't a lot in the collections. Maybe we only have description at an aggregate level, or maybe we have handwritten text. So overall, though, the trend has been to push treasures out into the light of day, but it's more and more complicated to do that. But we decided to try it at a large state university library that I'm not going to name, that hired me to do the stuff that has to be done after digitization. So remotely from my home in Erie, Pennsylvania, I received hard drives of files, which I reviewed in Adobe Bridge. I tracked each item in a spreadsheet, making decisions about when to restrict, redact, or label special cases, and all the archivists in the crowd are now getting very antsy. And in the process, I helped to develop guidelines for this and other collections to be put on the web. Also, Jeff Goldblum is from Pittsburgh. At the end of about 10 months of doing this extremely part-time, I developed pretty robust documentation. I triaged and reviewed 65% of the collection, which was more than 19,000 files. The archivists are now breaking out in cold sweat. I found that if we restricted at the file level, we would need to restrict 47% of the collection. However, we were using a management system that didn't allow us to do that when the items were only described and available as one folder level item. So we actually had to restrict 70% of the collection because the folder contained at least one item that needed to be restricted. Otherwise, we would have had to have a secondary management system for that. Additionally, I flagged 5.3% for redaction. 2.9% was challenging because it had explicit imagery or actual pornography in it, and profanity. I spent 202 hours reviewing, 36 hours in meetings trying to figure out what to do, and 27 hours in creating documentation.
So what I found our real problem was that digitization of archival material does extend access, but without proper infrastructure in place, we risk mismanaging and misrepresenting collections, we create further confusion, and we create technical debt to manage materials in the future. These are all examples of things we didn't anticipate and didn't have a workflow for, or a system to handle. And I'll point out that we knew going in that the collection would have some privacy concerns, but it wasn't complex content, it was just image and text. But it turned out to be a really complex project. In the words of Myron Cope, double yoy. No Pittsburghers in the audience? Thank you. So here's where my midlife crisis really comes in. I have been one of these cheerleaders for scaling up and taking more risks, and that digitization is cheap. However, there were numerous ways we created more costs for ourselves. I mentioned the management system couldn't handle things. There was a lot of content that was duplicated. Archivists are nodding their heads. Things that we could have pulled out during an initial large-scale appraisal. And the biggest concern for me was that we were creating a lot of work for ourselves in order to actually preserve these materials. Because of privacy and copyright, a lot of it can't be made available for 75 plus years. Did we really need to scan it now, and how are we going to have it in 75 years? So my crisis. Is there a way to do this to increase scale and efficiency without living in a land of make-believe? I do think so, but I think it requires a bit of consideration of institutional readiness, developing workflows in the meat space, the staff, as well as the systems, figuring out what we have the capacity for, and considering the ethics of what we're doing, particularly with collections from recent history. But that is a whole other talk. Thank you.
All right, I think I'm going now, and then Kevin's going to go, I think is what we decided, right? Whatever, it's all good. Wait for PowerPoint, my time's not started yet, is it? Present, where's the percent? Wait, oh, what? Wait, oh, hey, okay. All right, so first a confession. This is a redo of a lightning talk that I already did. Sorry, Ruth, you already saw this. But that time it was a 90-second lightning talk, and this time it's a 5-minute lightning talk, so we're like, oh, I can just go on and on. All right, so I'm a user experience person, so I spend a lot of time thinking about design. But what's design? I guess that usability is part of user experience design, right? We design things so that people can complete the tasks they need to complete. In other words, function is an essential part of design. But then why do we differentiate design from usability? I think that is because design suggests there's also an affective component to the work, right? So users' emotional response to the experience is important. Here I've described this as aesthetics because I didn't think about it in as much detail as I have since I wrote these slides. And since I'm reusing these slides, I can't rewrite it to say affect. But whenever you see aesthetics, you can think about affect. What do I mean by affect? Things like delight, satisfaction, frustration, including things like aesthetic response, the emotional dimension of interacting with an object, a thing that is created. So we're just going to stick with aesthetics because that's what I wrote on the slides when I wrote them. All right, so we could think of function and aesthetics as dimensions that describe the things we create. Everything we make ends up somewhere on this plot with varying levels of functionality and varying degrees of affective response that it triggers, right? We could also simplify each dimension down to just low and high, splitting the graph into these 4 quadrants. We've got the universe of creative endeavors that have low functionality, and those that have high functionality, and those that are low aesthetic response, and those that are high aesthetics. And we've created the world's greatest visualization tool, the 2x2, right? So now everything we create exists in one of these 4 quadrants. So if your creation is a failure in terms of both function and aesthetics, what you've made is crap. If your creation lives here, you've done something wrong, and hopefully we avoid this quadrant, right? That's our goal. And if you disregard functionality in favor of pure aesthetics, this is what we call art, a creation whose goal is to evoke an emotional response, right? And if you're focused solely on functionality, what you're doing is engineering. You're creating a tool that gets the job done. I argue that we need to achieve both functional and aesthetic success at the same time in order to say that we've accomplished design. So this framework gives us a way of thinking about what products are works of art, what products are works of engineering, and what things are examples of design. Furthermore, we can use this framework to think about what the goals for our own projects are. So let's consider a technical product that we want to improve. For the sake of simplicity, we'll just stick it at the center of the graph here. And so people often think of the process of product improvement as finding the right balance and a sort of trade-off. Do we make it more functional at the cost of aesthetics, or do we sacrifice some functionality in favor of aesthetic considerations? I argue if you frame the choices in product development as being a trade-off between function and aesthetics, you're not doing design. Instead, you're trying to decide whether you'd rather be an artist or an engineer. You're only doing design if you are working to make your product succeed in terms of both the function and aesthetics. Now, I'm not saying these trade-offs never happen in product development, but if we're going to call ourselves designers, we should always be striving to hold both function and affect in high esteem. We should always be working towards design without compromise. And that's all I got. And I'm supposed to help get the next set of slides up, which is Kevin, and there we go.
Thanks, it's great to be back. I'm Kevin Kuchansky. I work with Notch8. We're a Sambera service provider, among other things, and I'm here to talk about haiku. Quick show of hands, raise your hand if you know what haiku is. Oh, that's pretty good. I'm not talking about the Japanese poetry, I'm talking about the four-letter word. Anyway, for the rest of you, I have put together 2 quick slides to kind of give a background. Haiku is a Sambera solution bundle, and as quickly as I can, I'll try to explain that, which is Sambera is a core set of components that interfaces with Fedora and Solar. It is very flexible because of that. It requires a lot of development to get to a user-ready state. Hyrax is a version of a closer to user-ready Sambera implementation, and Haiku is built on Hyrax and adds a couple extra features. So among those features shared by Haiku and Hyrax, faceted search and browse, universal viewer, IIIF support, ability to submit new items, batch import, collection management and collection types, mediated deposit, access controls, embargoes and leases. And unique to Haiku, chief among them is multi-tenancy, which is the ability for several discrete tenants to share one implementation of the software. Bulk import is now an option, and that's larger bulk than just the small batch. Bulk export is soon an option, and Haiku also has a lot more out-of-the-box theming options for the everyday user without having to bring in a developer. A little bit of news from Haiku. Advancing Haiku is pretty big development. Open source institutional repository platform development. There's a $1 million award from the Arcadia Charitable Fund for 2 years of work in support of the project partnership with University of Virginia, Ubiquity Press, and the British Library. Among the features they want to move forward in Haiku is integrating open resource discovery tools, adding metrics to indicate usage of contents, syncing with author identification services like ORCID, which is something I've heard from several of our clients, interactive features like in-browser display and annotation and others. You can read more about that at advancinghaiku.io. PALNI and PALSI, the Pennsylvania Academic Library Consortium, Incorporated, and the Private Academic Library Network of Indiana, were awarded a grant from IMLS to further develop Haiku into a meaningful solution for library consortia. Their goals include refined workflows, cross-tenant user permissions, more robust theming and branding options, among others. They'll be working with Notch8 starting next month to move into that next phase, and you can read about that at their blog, haikuforconsortia.org. Bulk racks is a new feature, optional feature in Haiku, a bulk importer, also soon to be a bulk exporter. Currently includes support for OAI PMH, DC, and qualified DC, CSV, Baget, XML, right out of the box. It's extensible, allowing you to easily add new importers in your application or to include them with other gems. It's easy to use, has an easy to use interface with which you're able to create, edit, delete, run, and rerun imports from inside the admin dashboard. And the exporter work is soon to be delivered for a project with Oregon Digital, with Oregon State University and the University of Oregon. There are haiku service solutions. You can find more information about those. Ubiquity Press has one, Ubiquity Repositories. Notch 8 also has Haiku Up at haikuup.com. You can visit both of those sites to get information, and there is a Samvera sponsor table right outside that door, and there's a lot of information about both of those options there. To read a little bit more and keep up on haiku, feel free to join the Google group, Samvera Haiku. Check out haiku.samvera.org, which is just kind of an all-purpose first stop website. Notch 8 is hosting a Hyrax and Haiku user workshop in San Diego in August. There's a bit.ly link, but I also have flyers for that out in the lobby at the Samvera table. That's a pretty picture of San Diego beaches because I thought it was going to be freezing here in Pittsburgh, and I thought that would be attractive, but instead we're outside sweating. You can, if you happen to be in South Africa for Open Repositories in June, which I won't be, but British Library is part of a haiku workshop there. There's a haiku channel on Samvera Slack, so feel free to check out Samvera Slack. And the last Thursday of every month at 8 a.m. Pacific, 11 Eastern, there is a haiku interest group. So if you're just curious, drop by one Thursday and listen to what people have to say about haiku. Thank you.
Yeah, I think I'm up, and I can just do this thing. Does it come up on the screen? Hi, I want to do a quick 5-minute talk today about something I've been thinking about a lot, and I was reminded of it this morning during some of the sessions when there was some commentary going on the Slack channel about how we need to have more introspection about what's going on within our profession here at this conference, for example. And what I want to propose is that we need to learn more about the history of our institutions just in general. I've been really interested in one thing that happened in Washington, D.C., where I work last year, which is that the Apple Carnegie Library opened up. And I've been really curious about what this means exactly. It's the original DC Public Library, maybe not the original, but it was the DC Public Library for some time. It was an abandoned building for a while, and now it's this Apple store. So I'm interested in thinking about what this means about the interplay of technology, culture, and the urban environment, and also libraries. I've been to this place a few times. It's within walking distance of where I work. It looks really nice. This is a zoom in. The only thing that really shows that it's an Apple store is this glowing Apple logo, which looks a lot like the glow on the laptops that I see in the reading room of the library where I work. This place hosts galleries, art shows, exhibitions by the Historical Society of DC. If you go to it, it's supposed to kind of feel just like one of the museums or other galleries that populate Washington, DC. It feels kind of like a commercial inside. People are using minimalist products to design and create beautiful things. But I really wonder about the lines between commerce and culture here, and whether or not an Apple store is a public space. This is something that has been an ongoing concern of mine, and I wanted to know more about the Carnegie Libraries that was the skeleton for this building, how they were developed, and a little bit more about them. And I was wondering after that, is a library a public space either? I read this book, Free to All, Carnegie Libraries in American Culture, and I don't especially recommend it, but I'm not an expert on any of this stuff, so it's definitely worth reading if you don't know anything about Carnegie Libraries like I don't. And the thing is, I've never worked in a public library, and I thought it would be helpful to learn something from this book, and as it turns out, see if I can get my notes back, Carnegie Library funding was really contested at the time when it came out. This should be no surprise, and maybe some of you in this room know a lot about this, but if you think about who Andrew Carnegie was, and speaking of Pittsburgh, this began here obviously, cities attacked Carnegie for giving this tainted money to the cities to develop these libraries, and it became, the new libraries that were built became a center of complicated negotiations over control of public cultural institutions. They tied into the shifting dynamics of contemporary class and gender roles. The design and the site location and the functionality were all fraught decisions based on power struggles, compromises, and prejudices of that era. So when we think about libraries as public spaces versus Apple stores as public spaces, I think it's just worth us considering that cities, libraries, and public institutions have always had to wrestle with these concerns about corporate financing and influence. There's never been an easy answer as to where the money comes to support culture. We just have to do the best that we can with the possibilities that are offered, sometimes even having to accept cash infusions from wealthy philanthropists and corporations. So I don't really have any answers here, but I would love to explore this topic further with anyone else who's interested in this stuff. Thanks.
What do I do here? I have no idea.
Are you in Google?
Oh,
Your
I don't
slides?
know.
Oh, I don't know either.
I have to do my Whitney invitation. Oh,
I'm
you're
glad
already
I'm
full
not
screen.
screen. There's some sort of menu somewhere. Oh, there it is, and then you scroll down.
Where,
And there, you didn't get a link.
No, I did. It's home.
Home? Oh, home. Oh, thank you. All right.
Hi, my name's Eric Morgan. I work for the University of Notre Dame, and I would like to share with you a thing that I call the distant reader. The distant reader is a tool for reading. The problem that I'm trying to solve is not find. I can find plenty of stuff. The problem I have is use and understanding. How do I use and understand all the information that I get? And so I created this thing I call the distant reader. The distant reader takes an arbitrary amount of text as input and outputs a set of structured data for reading and analysis. It's the biggest computer I've ever had in my entire life. I have more disk space than I'll ever be able to use. I have more RAM than I can count, and I have 144 cores at my disposal. It's really kind of cool in that way. You can feed the distant reader 4 different types of input: a URL, a file, a list of URLs, or a zip file. And so, for example, I fed it the URL of Code4LIb journal. No, Code4LIb journal. No. I fed it, for example, a list of all the URLs pointing to the documents from Code4LIb journal. And I ended up with a set of stuff. Let's see, I'm going to go back over here. And I'm going to type in Carol's. And go dot. And this is a set of sample distant reader content. And for example, I can list Code4LIb. Did it do it? No, I'm wasting my time. Stop, escape. To heck with that. So what you can do is you can feed a whole pile of content to this thing, and in the results what you get is back a lists of all the people in your particular set of content, all the nouns, all the verbs, all the adjectives, all the places, all the dates, all the times, all the number amounts. And what's really cool is that you can then reverse engineer this sort of content and ask the thing questions. What is Mark? And you get back a whole pile of questions that answer what is Mark, and then you can look up what is Mark. I did another thing. I reversed engineered the HathiTrust. I searched WorldCat for subject equals truth and date less than 1923 and got back a whole pile of stuff. And then I used that to search the HathiTrust for HathiTrust identifiers, and then I got a whole pile of truth documents. And then I harvested those particular documents and fed them to the reader, and now I can answer questions like, what is truth? What is justice? What is knowledge? And the idea is that I want to read whole piles of stuff. Right now, I'm reading the entire 5th edition of Encyclopedia Britannica, and before I go home from the Code4LIb, I hope to read all editions from the 1st to the 8th in one great big pile, and I'll be able to see trends over time of how the encyclopedia has changed over time. I think that's a lot of fun. So the Distant Reader is a tool for reading. It's a giant indexer. It's the biggest thing I've ever written, and it's free for anybody to use. Its address is distantreader.org. And I have a pile of workbooks for free. I have a few left over from my workshop, and I'm very happy to share with anyone who really cares. Thank you very much for listening.
Okay, I'm Emily Wall at the Folger Shakespeare Library in DC. I'm going to talk about British book illustrations from the 17th century, which I know does not sound very Code4LIb, but I promise it's actually about metadata. And just as a note, all the images in this presentation are from that BBI project. There's citation information in the bottom right of every slide, and you can find them all on luna.folger.edu. So BBI was an NEH grant-funded project to digitize and index 10,000 woodcut and engraved illustrations in our 17th century British and English language books, which is a particular collecting strength of ours. We do this sort of digitization very routinely, and generally the metadata for these images comes straight from the catalog record. So if we have a piece of art that is cataloged individually, we're all good to go. If we have an entire book that's digitized, that's pretty straightforward. But when that art or illustration is bound into a book, it gets more complicated because the metadata for that illustration or for the digital image of that illustration is for the book it's contained in rather than the illustration itself, and that makes them hard to find. So the important part of this grant, I think, was the indexing. So for that, we used Icon Class, which is a very, very cool classification systems for the subjects, themes, and motifs in Western art, both literal and figurative. So as an example of this, on the left, you'll see a picture of a greyhound. This is from a bestiary we have called Topsell's History of Four-Footed Beasts. It's just a dog. So the icon class heading for this is pretty straightforward. It's just dog, parentheses, greyhound. On the right, we also have a dog, and that will get the icon class heading for dog, but it's not just a dog. This is from an emblem book, and the dog here is representing the concept of insatiableness. And so icon class gets very specific, and there is a heading for insatiableness, parentheses, plus emblematical representation of concept. So it'll get that heading as well. It's broken up into 10 major subject areas. 0 is abstract non-representational art, which didn't really come up for us in this project. Then we have religion and magic, nature, human being, man in general, society, civilization, culture, abstract ideas and concepts, history, Bible, literature, and classical mythology of ancient history. And the numbers alongside each of these 10 subject areas is the start of the identification string for that subject area. So the whole vocabulary is hierarchical, and as you travel down in the hierarchy, you just add one character to the end of that identification string to get the unique identifier for that particular term, which makes it really easy then if you get too specific in your search, you can just chop a few characters off the end and search more generally within the same topic. So as an example, here we have at level, or at heading 4, society, civilization, culture. You can then go down one level to material aspects of daily life, and then to nutrition, and then to foodstuffs, and then to bread, cake, pastry, etc., and finally to pie. And if you search for pie or for 401C625 in BBI, you'll get this weird bird lady sitting on top of a pie. And if you want to explore it further, we have it all available at britishbookillustrations.folger.edu, or you can just go to bbi.folger.edu. And that is it.
All right. Thank you, everybody who did a lightning talk. They were awesome. Just a couple of announcements before we wrap up the day. Tonight, the reception starts at 6:30. The community support volunteers will be wearing the black and white lanyards that you've seen. And there is a phone number and email address and contact if anybody should need that tonight. It's under the conduct and safety section of the primary conference page, which is 2020.code4lib.org if you don't already have it memorized. Reception, oh, this is new stuff. Okay, logistics. So it's going to be at the Carnegie Museum of Pittsburgh from 6:30 to 8:30, the reception tonight. Buses will be available to shuttle people from the hotel to the museum. The first one is leaving around 6:10. You'll meet for the shuttle on the Penn Avenue side of the hotel next to Jimmy John's. The last bus will leave from the hotel to the reception at 7:15, and buses will start to return back to the hotel starting at 7:30, last one leaving the reception at 8:40. And then if you are giving a talk tomorrow, please arrive between 8 and 8:45 to load your presentation to the computer or get your slides up. If you have not signed the consent form for streaming and sharing your slides, please get that done at the registration table. And otherwise, that wraps us up for day one. Thank you, everybody, for coming, and success.